Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Our guest today on the Radical Imagination is Bruce Adolphe. As a composer, author, pianist, human rights activist, lecturer, and performer, Bruce is next to impossible to categorize as he seeks to connect disparate ideas and disciplines and to build community by exploring diverse manifestations of human creativity. He's known to millions of Americans as the piano puzzler on American public media's performance today. He's been the resident lecturer and director of family concerts for the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center for the last 30 years. Composer in residence at the Brain and Creativity Institute, founding creative director of Off the Hook Arts Festival, founding creative director of the Learning Maestros, and the author of several books on music, including The Mind's Ear, Exercises for Improving the Musical Imagination, The Rutledge Companion of Music and Human Rights, and The Secrets of Creativity. He's composed music for Yo-Yo Ma, Yitzhak Perlman, Joshua Bell, the Beaux-Arts Trio, the National Symphony Orchestra, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and many, many other performers and organizations. On May 15th, when this show is first aired, the Dallas Symphony Choir will present the Dallas premiere of Bruce's work, This Kiss to the Whole World, a celebration of Beethoven's monumental Ninth and Final Symphony. Beethoven was completely deaf and experiencing major frustration, loneliness, and depression. The riveting scherzo reflects Beethoven's daily struggle to communicate with the outside world, and the finale expresses the humanistic idea that all people of this earth should love one another. Bruce has captured an epic summation of Beethoven's genius, and the world struggled to imagine a better existence for all. I'm so honored and blessed to have him on the show today. I've long anticipated this show, and I hope it will be the first of many visits. He's everything the Radical Imagination is striving to be and become, and more. So, Bruce, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to have you on the
Thank
show.
you, Jim. Thank you for having me on your show. I love the title.
Well, you epitomize it. I'm telling you, and it just so happens that we are doing a symposium in a couple of days at Union Theological Seminary entitled Imagining and Exploring, Imagining and Reinventing Thinking About Violence and Creative Ways of Dealing with it. So we're seemingly doing similar, our concerns are similar, aren't they? And you come at it from the deep musical tradition as a composer, as a performer, as a pianist, and I, of course, am trying to do that as a sociologist as well. And my colleagues, Jim Gilligan and Bandy Lee, are psychiatrists. So we're on the same page. So Bruce, start us off here. Tell us the beginnings of your interest in music. As a child, I know that your parents were not musicians as such, but they were very familiar with folk music and folk dancing. Is that correct?
That's true. When I was a child, a lot of the music that I heard at home was folk music from around the world, from everywhere. My parents were not professional dancers, but they were very good, and they functioned as professional folk dance teachers during the summers. Had a huge collection of 45, those little discs, of folk dances. And I learned folk dances from around the world as a kid. But I also was watching Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concerts on TV. And I think that really, I know that it really spoke to me, my whole generation, really. And many of the musicians that I know who are my age were turned on to music, classical music, possibly being a composer, conductor, or pianist because of Leonard Bernstein. And we didn't even have a piano in the house. So I started playing the piano on the kitchen table. And my parents at first got me a toy piano, which was not very satisfying. We had a parakeet at the time, and the parakeet picked apart the keys on the toy piano. When they realized that wasn't good enough, they eventually got me, I think I was 6. Yes, I was 6, and they got a real piano. And actually, we had a larger bird by the time I was 10, and I still have that bird. But so I started improvising on the piano, and they got me a piano teacher. The first one was not very good. Told my parents I had no musical ability, but that was because I didn't like sitting next to him on the bench. He smelled of cigars and alcohol. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I didn't like it. And so the second teacher, Eleanor Nelson, who passed away recently at age 90, was a great teacher. And she encouraged my improvisations and my composing, which I started doing immediately, because unless someone stops a child, there's no reason not to make things up at the piano and play things that you've heard and explore the keys. And a bad teacher would tell you to stop doing that and learn one thing at a time. But instead, I was encouraged to explore my imagination. So between Leonard Bernstein and my first good piano teacher, I knew I wanted to be a composer very young.
And your parents' patience with you playing on the kitchen table there, which you were probably when did that start? When you were 2, 3 years old, 4 years old?
Probably. Yeah, I don't remember that exactly, but I remember doing it, but I don't know how old
Yeah,
I
I saw it.
Yeah.
So
I can still do it. I can still play on tables, no problem.
I'm sure you can, and perhaps budding Mozart was doing that as well. But isn't this where it all starts? Very early in childhood, you've written so much about creativity and what it means to be a creative person. So get us started to understand that. You as a creative person, as a child, being allowed to experiment around and to feel the tempos and the emotions and watch your parents and their interest in dance as well. I know I had a similar background in that sense. My mother played the piano, and she was very smart about that. She never told me I had to go get piano lessons, but music was always part of our house, the environment of our house, and I just naturally wanted lessons. I begged her for it. And again, of course, I was of that generation too. Leonard Bernstein was my person, the go-to person that a young child would go to and get some knowledge of classical music, get an appreciation of it.
Yes, well, as time went on, I mean, I studied piano seriously. I was composing, and I had all these ideas to play other instruments, and I was never told by my parents to keep up the parental idea. They never told me you have to study something more seriously than something else. I was playing guitar and banjo and bass fiddle and bassoon and clarinet, and I was serious about all of it. And I was never told to practice the piano, leave the banjo alone or something like that, or do your schoolwork, which I did anyway. And then I wanted to go to a music camp, and my father died when I was 12, and my mother didn't know what to do about a music camp. So we went to lots of concerts, and after every concert, she would take me backstage to meet the performer and always ask, "Do you know of a good music camp?" And one of them did. It was Kyung-Hwa Chung, wonderful violinist, and she had played an encore, which was Stravinsky's The Lullaby from the Firebird, arranged by Samuel Dushkin. And she said Samuel Dushkin's brother, David Dushkin, has a music camp in Vermont. And so the connection was amazing, because I actually had dinner with Sam Dushkin and David Dushkin when I was 14 or 15 years old. I didn't quite understand that David Dushkin premiered the Stravinsky violin concerto, and he was sitting right in front of me. But I knew they were amazing guys. And the camp was great, and it was called Kinhaven. It still exists, and I went there for several summers, and my daughter went there. And it was very formative between the Juilliard pre-college experience, which was for kids before college age studying at Juilliard, and also the Kinhaven Music Camp. I just felt I had wonderful experiences encouraging adults in a very nurturing atmosphere.
And then you went to Juilliard. So that's a common experience, isn't it, of many Juilliard students, that they go to these summer camps and their interest in music is nurtured and develops there, and then they go to Juilliard. Is that correct?
I think so. I don't know how totally common it is, but certainly I would say that practically every professional musician I know, especially in classical music, started very, very young. They all start 4, 5, 6 years old.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that?
Well,
That it's occurred.
Children feel very deeply. They feel the world deeply. They experience emotions deeply. They just haven't had experience. And music is an outlet where you don't need a vocabulary in your spoken language. You don't need to be able to express what it is that gets to you. I mean, music is not limited by the specificity of language. I mean, music can approach joy, ecstasy, grief, sorrow, anger directly, with even before one has had an experience with some of these things. So, but every child has been angry or upset or ecstatic, or every emotion, and then the music speaks right to it. So the desire to play music, I think, is very strong, or to be involved in music, and it's sad when it's not realized in some way. But obviously, there is such a thing as musical ability, meaning that one has a good sense of pitch. Like most musicians, as children, learn their instruments very fast, faster than let's say someone without that musical ability. But music involves not just hearing pitch and having a sense of rhythm, which most people do have, but it also involves every aspect of the brain. It involves emotion, intellect, small muscle movement, large scale muscle movement. Everything is put together. And so children who study music, and neuroscience has shown this a lot recently, children who study music before puberty for at least 10 years, their brains are positively influenced and grow in an interesting way, making more connections than children who don't do that. So that, let's say, the same child were to, I mean, you couldn't do this experiment yet, but let's say there were two of the exact, well, with identical twins, you could. One has a lot of musical experience and one doesn't. The musical experience might make that kid better than he or she would have been at math, at spatial awareness, at even sports, at being articulate. It's just amazing what it does. But the most important thing is intrinsically, music itself has great worth and is a way of connecting to life's most deep experiences, most meaningful experiences without words.
Without words. You're not saying, or are you, that, or the neuroscientists are saying, there's a place in the brain that one can point to, and this is where the center for creativity lies? And
no, I mean, creativity actually is the opposite of that. I mean, in many ways, creativity is about connection.
Glad you said that. Good. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's about making connection.
Some sort of deterministic physiological.
No, what I mean is that if music is brought in early enough, that it activates so many parts of the brain, makes so many connections, that it's a healthy thing for the human mind.
Right.
By connecting it up, so that what we think of as intellectual and physical and emotional, the more connections there are, the more one's thinking and feeling are connected, the more human we become. And more sensitive, the more empathetic. And more compassionate too, I would imagine.
Isn't that amazing, though, Bruce? That the programs that go first in our early childhood education, particularly in the public schools, music and art. Why do you think that's the case? We understand that, and yet it seems like we don't want that creativity. We don't want people to and young people to grow as individual thinking and feeling human beings.
It's been a struggle for so many years.
Why? Why are some cultures perhaps more open than others? I'm pushing it in terms of human rights here.
Yes.
And the totalitarian personalities and
Well, I think
that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, but it seems to me that if education is unfortunately thought of as just a path to a job, rather than a way of building a whole person, a compassionate person, a person interested in others and other things, then obviously the basic skills of language and mathematics, which are extremely important, and maybe some history, are considered more important than music and art. This argument has been going in cycles for years and years and years, and it's probably never going to stop. But clearly, music is intrinsically worth a great deal at the same time as it does help the brain function, and it helps the mind blossom into a full, empathetic, and compassionate person.
Absolutely, but again, societies respond to music and performances and different pieces in different ways, and some are booed off the stage, and this is too much for people to take, and so on. And I mean, what do you make of that? And can we encourage audiences to be more open? I know you try and do that in your own work as you try to open up people's minds and hearts to the sufferings of others.
Well, the amazing
sufferings, but yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure about booing off the stage, exactly what you're referring to, but I know that certainly this happens. But in classical wordless music, which is one of my main interests, I love opera and songs, and I work with words all the time, but it's a different thing. Music without words is less a part of the fabric of, let's say, the non-classical world. Most people who love music think of songs and think of pieces that have words and text, and that's totally fine. But that world of wordless music is another dimension of human experience, because if, for example, when I want to address human rights, which I've done I just counted today, 11 different large-scale works of mine, sometimes I use words and sometimes I don't. But I think that there's a profound place. There's a place that we don't get to unless it's without words. Like, there's a space where you react to music. And in that space, you can learn and you can grow as a person, and you can be, your heart can be changed and opened up. And so, I mean, for example, one of my pieces, "I Will Not Remain Silent," is about it's about Joachim Prinz, who was a rabbi in Berlin during the Nazi period, and then when he came to the United States, he became very involved in the civil rights movement and was a friend of Martin Luther King, and both parts of his life are in this violin concerto that I wrote about him. The first movement takes place in Nazi Germany, and the second takes place in America. In the first movement, the violin, and in the second, actually, the violin represents the voice of this Rabbi Joachim Prinz, and the violin is inflected with a certain amount of cantorial Jewish music as just sort of an aspect of the way the violin speaks. And the orchestra represents primarily the violence of Nazi Germany, but also occasionally the fear of people living in Nazi Germany at that time. We could actually listen to a little bit of that.
We will. Yes, we're going to have that put on this show. Yes, absolutely.
Should I say something about that clip?
Yes, please do. We are having I think about a 5-minute excerpt of it. So tell us about that.
Well, this clip of "I Will Not Remain Silent" is from a performance in Houston, Texas, by the ensemble known as ROCO, which is the River Oaks Chamber Orchestra. And the violinist is Scott St. John, and the conductor is Michael Stern, who is Isaac Stern's son. And we're hearing the last few minutes, the last 5 minutes of the first movement. So the violin is the voice of Joachim Prinz pleading with Jews to leave Germany, trying to explain what's going to happen because he was aware of it before many people because of his connections. And the orchestra is basically trying to destroy him and destroy Jews. And so he's, at the end of this clip, you will hear the orchestra literally violently attacking the instrument, the violin, with these 20 to maybe it's 21 hammer blows of sound, but the violin is holding on to its sort of truth and remains there, basically victorious, at least in a way, in that it's not beaten down.
And of course, this is a transcendent, transformative message that other peoples can relate to in their own struggles.
Yes. Well, the thing about music is that I say this is about Joachim Prinz, a rabbi in Nazi Germany, and what the music represents. But if I didn't say that, the music would still clearly be about an individual who is somehow doing battle with this orchestra, that there's a society or a group that is trying to crush the voice of an individual. You could hear that as many different things. And that's the beauty of wordless music, is that it has a message, but the message is not as specific as words. It's deeper than that. So that violence is everybody's violence. The individual voice of Joachim Prinz is everybody's individual voice, because music speaks on a metaphorical level that is more profound than even a great text, because a great text is one story. And of course, we can abstract that into our own story. But with music, it is naturally a metaphor, naturally abstracted. And so that sorrow in music is everyone's sorrow, and ecstasy is everyone's ecstasy. You don't need a cultural explanation. Although it is true that different kinds of music from around the world speak more clearly to different cultures. But generally speaking, with some acquaintance with music from any culture, it gets to you, and it gets to you past knowing what the words might be that tell that story.
Let me ask you, is this something that, this orientation, is this something that can be taught? Is it something you experience in your own education at Juilliard, for example, or conservatory?
To a certain extent, although I think by time one gets to Juilliard, you have to have a lot of experience. It's a rather difficult school to get into. And I think that people have a deep experience of music before that. But it's a never-ending learning experience. And you don't have to be a musician to experience this. You only have to be open to music. Because speaking of Leonard Bernstein, he said many times that the only thing you really need to understand music is to listen deeply. You don't need to know harmony. You don't need to study an instrument. It helps, of course, but to be open to the sounds of music and to experience it, without prejudging, without trying to figure out what's happening to you, just to allow the stimulation of wordless music, in this case, to get to you emotionally. It works. Now, it's true, of course, studying an instrument, and writing music oneself, singing in a chorus, all of these things do expand one's ability to appreciate and understand music, just like playing tennis helps you follow tennis. And if you write poetry, you understand poetry better just because you understand what it means to put words together that way.
And it helps you to be more creative, correct?
Yes. Well, I mean,
that's part of the real manifestation of being creative is to feel and to let it happen, in a sense.
I mean, creativity is really a combination of imagination and memory. So you need, in order to be creative in a language, you need to have an archive of information and experience that helps you use that language. So if you want to write in English, it helps to have read interesting, good books and poetry and novels and et cetera, because that gives you an archive of examples. The same with music. The more music you hear, and the more you experience music, then the more you have available to your imagination. I often, when working with kids in imagination, which I love to do, I'll say, well, just think of something you do every day, and then imagine something happens that has never happened before. And with kids, they often think of doing something like brushing their teeth. And then with the imagination moment, when they can do anything happens, they see a monster crashing through the mirror or an explosion and snakes. I mean, whatever it is they see, it happens to their imagination, because the creative moment really is the moment where your mind seems to be doing something or showing you or playing music for you that you did not make happen. It's like dreaming. And we all experience this. Like if I were to say, imagine, I'll make it a sound. Imagine footsteps in the snow. Now imagine them running. Now already you can easily feel the difference between just responding to my prompt or whether you're making something happen. If I say, imagine footsteps in the snow, and you immediately see something and hear something, that's fine. But if you change the shoes or change the snow, now you're already thinking. That's different than this attentive dreaming. So this combination of allowing your imagination to flow, which is like dreaming, versus manipulating ideas, which is the editing thinking process. You need both to be creative. But the one that's harder to get in touch with is this kind of daydreaming feeling. So, in a classroom, if a teacher tells you to stop daydreaming, well, maybe, but daydreaming is also something we need to practice so that we can remember our daydreams, because that's when our imaginations are free. And if you can remember that dreaming moment and take hold of it and then work with it, that's the creative process. So you study, let's say you study composition so that you know how to hold on to your ideas and make them into something.
And you make it personal, right? You start with the personal.
Yeah, usually you have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Something you had some experience about, but allow the imagination to then take you. You're sort of taken from that personal experience, and it expands, and as you say, you imagine all kinds of other things, and that's part of that creative process.
Well, the deeply personal things that are truly personal are universal, because we're all human. And so if you try to tell a story that's complex about something you've observed, you may not do so well. But if you really think about who you are and what you've experienced, then that will resonate with other people. It doesn't matter.
And why, but Bruce, then why is it so difficult, history of humankind, for us to be able to relate to the suffering of others, to relating to the pain of the stranger, of the other? And again, in your work, on 1,000 Forms of Sorrow, why has it that been so difficult for humans to accomplish? If you say it's universal, how can we not? How can we go about the thousands of ways that we cause suffering?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it's difficult. Not that I've studied how it's difficult, but it seems to me that it's fear. It's denial. I mean, we live in so many kinds of denial. And
of what? Denial, fear of what? Denial
of death, denial of illness, denial of. I mean, whenever you get in a car to go somewhere, the statistics go out of your head. They're scary. Climate change, people don't walk around thinking of it every moment of the day. But throughout human history, there's always been plenty to be afraid of. And dealing with fear often closes down empathy, because one sees oneself. But, but for the grace of God go I. I don't mean to bring God into it, because that's not how I see things. But I mean, that's a saying. There, in other words, to identify with another person is vital for being human, and it has a little bit of. It's scary too. I mean, if world leaders and politicians thought in terms of empathy and kindness and compassion, we would have a very different world. Some do, but obviously many don't. And if decisions are all based on whether they do good for other people versus whether they hurt or harm people, it would be a very different world. It's been this way forever. History shows that. But
that's the point. We've got to begin to change that pattern, because we
try. Yeah, I think music can help. I mean, to go into a concert hall or to sit with speakers or earphones and to allow oneself to listen to profound music. And there's a lot of it in the world, and it's not a stylistic thing. It's just deeply messaged music. And then look for that space in yourself where the things that you normally push away, that you don't want to think about. It's kind of like a religious experience. And for me, music is a religious experience. I mean, it is the most spiritual thing that I do, which is to be involved with beautiful and intense music, and music that speaks about sorrow or grief as well as joy and excitement and humor. So in the piece you mentioned, Are There Not 1,000 Forms of Sorrow?
Yes.
I was really inspired by this book by Ethan Kanan, whom I know, wonderful author. The book is called The Doubter's Almanac. And in the book, there's a line, actually it's 2 lines. Are there not 1,000 forms of sorrow? Is the sorrow of death the same as the sorrow of knowing the pain in a child's future? And that's a rare thought. I mean, we all may think it, but to express it, this is the sorrow of death the same as the sorrow of knowing the pain in a child's future. So I started thinking about my own daughter. She's now 23, but when I wrote it, she was a bit younger, not much younger. And I was thinking about the pain in a child's future. I mean, climate change. At the time, Trump was still president, and I was thinking, of all the oppressions of all the different kinds of people of color, of women, of Jews, of the LGBTQ community, of immigrants, of students. I mean, you name it. And I was thinking, what kind of future is this going to be if our country goes in this direction, and there's climate change? So I felt that this question, are there not 1,000 forms of sorrow? And is the sorrow of death the same as the sorrow of knowing the pain in your child's future? I had to make that into a piece of music. And so I wanted to create the same feeling of that big question mark, the sorrow, some of the fear, and some of the anger, too, that goes with how that question evolves in when you think about it, what it does in your mind and how it makes you feel. And for me, it's much easier and more significant to write music about that than to try to write any more text. I mean, the book is brilliant and deals with that very beautifully.
And your daughter has written a beautiful piece as well, Weaponized Music, and I'm looking toward the very end of that, and in which she talks about real change requires memory. Healing requires not only verbalization, but dismantling the destructive systems left behind.
Yes,
healing is not a purge or exorcism. It is a process, one that does not erase, but rather sees the haunting presence of past in present. Last couple of music's emotional power, as you're pointing out, may be deployed to cause enormous harm, but it can also recognize the destructive capacity. Yet by linking the multivariant functions of music to memory, the play suggests that music may also function as a means of recovery and as a mode of active remembrance. So it can lead to harm or to active recovery, in the sense, correct?
Yeah, well, I thank you for quoting that. That's amazing. You're reading from my daughter's chapter in a book that's coming out this month.
Yeah,
probably at the end of the month, if not early June. The Routledge Guide to Music and Human Rights. My daughter did write a chapter for that book, which you were quoting from, Weaponized Music. It's an amazing chapter. Yeah. And I wrote the chapter on wordless music, like I've been talking about. And there are 28 chapters by authors from all over the world, and 23 what are called voices, which are smaller chapters, but they're substantial as well. Personal experiences dealing with music and human rights from people from all over the world. It's a book written by musicians, scholars, lawyers, human rights lawyers, activists, all sorts of people who have things to say And one of the editors, Julian Pfeiffer, is the executive director of Musicians for Human Rights, and which I've worked with quite a bit. It's an orchestra and also an organization bigger than the orchestra in Europe. That's quite remarkable. And Julian was originally the founder and executive director of the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. So I've known Julian for a very, very long time. And this book project he's put together with 4 other editors is remarkable. Music and Human Rights. The piece we were referring to, Are There Not 1,000 Forms of Sorrow? We have a clip of that too. And that's performed at the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center in Tully Hall right before the pandemic started. The names of the players that will come up on the screen at the end. This is the last 3 minutes of a maybe 17-minute work or so. And it starts with some feeling of rage, but it mostly is sorrow and this feeling of sadness. And it ends in a very lonely way with this question, the same question that I was saying, is the sorrow of death the same as the sorrow of knowing the pain in a child's future? I tried to actually make that a cello solo so that it gets to you the same way that question does. It makes you feel the same way, I think. At least I know it makes me feel that way. And as we were saying, when you do something deeply personal, if you really tap into yourself, usually other people get that because the truly personal is universal.
When it becomes universal and when the ideas and the feelings become more concretized, would an example be the Palestinian and Israeli attempts to bring musicians together, as Daniel Barenboim did with a symphony orchestra? Is that the next step that we need to look at in terms of human rights?
That was a great and is a great experiment, which I think has worked extremely well for those people who are involved. The only unfortunate thing is there's not enough people involved. But there's no doubt that Daniel Barenboim's orchestra, made up of Palestinians and Israelis, usually they're young people. And I know, because I know some of those people, and I also know Elena Chea, who wrote the book about it, who was Daniel Barenboim's assistant. She had been my student many, many years ago. Elena wrote a book about exactly how this felt for her and for other people to come into an experience where you're worried. And usually what's interesting is their parents, the parents of these kids from Israel and Palestine, were very concerned that this was not a good idea, but they went with it. They took the risk. They became brave. And by playing music together, they broke down all the barriers, and the music brought out their humanity. They were collaborating, cooperating, working together in a common vision to make a great concert. And even though Daniel Barenboim had the idea, interestingly, he's a very difficult conductor. He gets angry easily, and he's a great truly magnificent musician. But he would scold the orchestra. And what I think they started to realize is that here's this brilliant guy. He's getting angry at all of us. He doesn't care if you're from Palestine or Israel. You got to play this better than that. He's a tough guy. And I think that brought some humor to it also, because here they were all banded together in order to respond to a very demanding and brilliant maestro. I think that is a great experiment. I'm glad you brought it up. It's one of the greatest experiments going.
Where do they play the concerts? Where do they have the concerts?
They have traveled around the world.
And in Jerusalem, Ramallah?
I don't know where they're doing. I'm not sure the state of it right now. The book is a few years old, and I haven't followed it recently, but it is a wonderful experiment. Now, the Human Rights Orchestra, which is not the same thing, that's the one that Julian Pfeiffer is the executive director of. That one is professional musicians from all over the world getting together to play to raise money for human rights. They play usually in Lucerne. But they do go on tour as well, and they have famous artists, and all these musicians play for free, and the famous guest artists usually play for either free or a fraction of what they normally would cost. And I've gotten involved with them too, and it has a similar feeling, even though these people are not coming from cultures that are doing battle or kind of at war with each other. They are coming from all these different cultures, leaving their professional situations, leaving their homes to tour together, to play with people they don't know, because they want to make a statement about the whole world being together. And this will have not just orchestra players from Europe, but also from Asia and the United States and from wherever they can come. And that is a wonderful experience as well.
Right. Right. Now, you want to say a few words? It sounds like also very much tied into your work that the Dallas Symphony Chorus will be playing.
No, I just want to correct one thing. It's the Dallas Symphony, not the chorus. The program consists of my piece played by the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, followed by the Beethoven Ninth Symphony played by the Dallas Symphony Orchestra with the chorus in the last movement. That might be a little misleading from one of the advertising pieces, but yeah, my piece is a 10-minute work. The title comes from Schiller's Ode to Joy, which is what Beethoven set to music, an incredibly powerful, astonishing, brilliant setting by Beethoven that is the world knows. I took the phrase "diesen Kuss der ganzen Welt," this kiss to the whole world, which is I don't try to set it to music like what Beethoven did, but I just use the idea that the whole world is together, and this piece is like a kiss to the world. But my piece is very different from the Beethoven because first of all, it wouldn't be impossible to do otherwise. But I was trying to introduce one of the greatest works of music ever written, one of the most profound statements about humanity and humankind and ever. So I decided, given this problem, to do the opposite. Instead of making a heroic statement about a vision of mankind's cooperation and a vision of peace on earth and the glory of humanity, I paint a kind of short narrative in which beauty and peace are attacked by other music. So there's violent music and there's beautiful, peaceful music, and they sometimes happen at the same time. It starts with some mysterious music, which blossoms into a beautiful lyrical phrase. And this becomes at first threatened by violent music and then overwhelmed by violent music, which then recedes. And we come back to something beautiful, but the violent music appears again in kind of little flickers at the end, as if it's not over yet. So it's kind of a more realistic view of the way the world is, which is as much as we want a world of peace and beauty, this violence, whether it's hatred or whether, since it's music, it doesn't even have to be hatred or violence. It could be the virus. It's something that disrupts life as we know it. So this piece is structured as a interruption in the life we wish we had. And that life of beauty returns, but it's still threatened by, again, whether it's the virus or hatred. The Russian composer Sofia Gubaidulina, who is now 90, said in an interview years ago, she called hatred a virus way before the pandemic. It was just a powerful thing. She said, hatred, this virus of mankind. And that stuck with me. And again, because music is not specific, there's no difference between violence or hatred or a virus or whatever it is that disrupts the flow of the way we wish things were. So the piece of music can be about any of these things, and it's about all of them. So Diesen Kuss der ganzen Welt premieres in Dallas. It's been this week, and May 15th, there's still a performance. Actually, that also will be videoed and available on demand eventually.
So in the last few minutes we have, the remembrance, the taking in of the sorrows and the pain and the violence, the recurring patterns. We've reached the point, though, that we've got to begin to break that cycle. And we've got to do that, it seems to me, through very concrete programs, policies, reaching out to people, as you have been, and through various experiments in international and universal living, in a sense. In the final couple minutes that we have, what do you hope classical music in particular can bring to that absolute necessity to change the pattern of violence that we agree has been around thousands and thousands of years? And hopefully we agree that it's not hardwired, it's not something inevitable. We can learn and unlearn it.
I think one of the things that has happened since the pandemic is very hopeful for classical music and its role in society, which is the Black Lives Matters protests. Many things happened as a result of that. But what's amazing to me, and I'm very proud of this, is that the classical music world stepped up immediately. In other words, the commissioning of composers of color went from a few to many. The inclusion of famous Black composers of the past who've been forgotten in programs has just blossomed. So now, instead of, if you wanted to hear a Black classical composer, you would say, are there any? Now they're everywhere. It's fantastic. And that also, and the music, of course, is wonderful. And there are a lot of great African-American classical musicians, but there are a few famous ones. And now it's becoming a bigger community. And most arts organizations in America, especially, have reacted by making a huge point of taking this forward and of exploring how to reach people of color as artists, commissioning them as composers, getting them as performers. It's fantastic. So I think that the opening up to a broader, diverse world of musicians and creators of music is a great thing. I also think that because wordless classical music can speak so profoundly, that diversifying who makes the music, who writes it, and who plays it is going to open up this world of profundity that classical music offers. Larger scale music than songs, with words. Songs are great, but they're 2 or 3 minutes long, and the text gets a lot of people's attention. To be able to go into music that takes its time and takes you out of the daily tick-tock of the daily drive of being a human being in a very busy world. Classical music stops time, and it changes your relationship to time and to feeling. And I think as that becomes more and more diverse, there's more hope for the whole society.
Bruce, it's been just wonderful having you on. I hope we'll do this many more times, and that you'll also be participating in our own institute that we're developing at Union and in International Peace Day, which will be in the fall. So
thank you. I'd love to do that.
We'd love to have you. Thank you so very, very much, Bruce.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you so very, very much as well for listening to us today on The Radical Imagination. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vredos.